Good evening, everybody. My name's Harry Perek. I'm the European Young Humanist Chair. I'd like to say thank you for joining us today for the last of the European Young Humanist Month events of this month. It's been a brilliant 4 weeks in relation to having different speakers come talking about matters that matter to young people. It's been great to have a variety of speakers come as well. And again, we're joined by two great speakers again for today's event. I'd like to start by thanking Young Humanists UK for all of their work in preparing and getting all of this set up in spite of the pandemic recently, and all of their efforts behind the scenes to do this too. So without further ado, let's talk about today's panel. So I'd like to introduce today. So today we're looking at blasphemy in Europe, and we have the amazing Giovanni Gattani joining us today. Giovanni is the Membership Engagement Manager of Humanists International and has worked for the organization since 2017. In this role, he collaborates with the hundreds of Humanists International members organizations around the world in order to deliver projects, organize training and events, spread the humanist message everywhere, and more. He has a PhD in philosophy with a thesis on the French philosopher Albert Camus, and has published 2 books in Italian so far, The Philosophy of Atheism and Humanism, and a third one is on the way, which will be an illustrated guide to humanism for teenagers, both in Italian and English. Secondly, we've got Rachel Taggart-Ryan. Rachel Taggart-Ryan is the Campaigns Officer at Humanists UK. Her work covers a wide range of issues in public affairs and policy, including protecting freedom of expression. She leads Humanists UK's campaign to repeal the blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland, establishing support from most of the major political parties, and has worked with Humanist Society Scotland to do the same in Scotland. She's also called for the repeal of the blasphemy laws globally at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. So for today, as with the rest of the events this month, please use the chat feature to ask questions. As the speakers are talking, I will attempt to relay those questions as we go through the event, and I'll do my best to do that through the Q&A as well. We should finish formally at 7:30, but hopefully people can stick around afterwards. Normal Zoom rules apply, so please stay on mute with your video, and we will start with the beginning with Giovanni to introduce blasphemy laws and the Ending Blasphemy Laws campaign.
Hello, Harry. Thank you so much for the presentation. I want to, first of all, thank you, and thanks Julian and the whole team at Young Humanists UK, because you're doing an amazing job with the European Young Humanist Month. It's sad because we were supposed to meet everyone all together in London in August, but then for the European Young Humanist Days 2020, but this amazing pandemic upset our plans. So here we are, and we have this series of events in October, and I really love it. So let me share my screen. Let's see. Voila. Are you able to see my screen, my presentation?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. So, as Harry said, I'm here on behalf of Humanists International, but I'm not going to talk about Humanists International. I'm just going to say that Humanists International is the umbrella organization that gathers together hundreds of humanist organizations all around the world. At the moment, we have 119 organizations in 62 countries, if I'm not wrong. And Humanists International is the founder and the leader of the End Blasphemy Law campaign, which is the theme of today. EBL stands for End Blasphemy Laws, and the name is quite explanatory, is the campaign to end blasphemy laws all around the world. So today, I think I'm going to speak 10, 15 minutes. I think 10 minutes is okay. And the 4 points of my presentation are the following. First, what's the End Blasphemy Law campaign? Why do we want to end blasphemy laws? Then we're going to look a bit at the global data. And finally, we're going to talk about the achievements since 2015. So let's start. As I said, the End Blasphemy Laws is first a global coalition of organizations. We have international members like Humanists International and the European Humanist Federation, but we have also national and state level organizations, including Humanists UK and many others. In general, it's a coalition open to all organizations from any religious or belief background. Indeed, we have also members from the feminist movement, members from the liberal Muslim movement. And in general, it's not just a coalition of non-religious organizations. It's a global coalition open to everyone. How can we gather together organizations that are so different? Well, we have the so-called EBL Charter, which is basically a 14-point agreement on what to do and how to do it. I'm not going to read it because it's too long, but we are going to make a reference to this later on in the second section. But what I wanted to say is basically that this is an essential commitment to end blasphemy laws, that it's applicable to countries all around the world. When was founded this campaign and this coalition? It was founded on 30 January 2015. What happened in 2015? Of course, humanist organizations and secular organizations have been campaigning for the end of blasphemy laws for those dozens of years before 2015. But on 7 January 2015, everyone will recall that something tragic happened. I'm referring to the attack to the Charlie Hebdo magazine. Everyone knows the story, so I don't need to talk too much about it. Charlie Hebdo was a satirical magazine from France. They repeatedly published cartoons portraying the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And on 7 January 2015, a group of Islamist terrorists attacked the building of the magazine, killed 12 people and injured 11 others. So after that tragic episode, Humanists International gathered together with its members and said, we need to do something more evident, more concrete to end blasphemy laws all around the world. And that's when we started the coalition and the campaign. It is worth noting that the campaign has two parallel goals. We want, of course, to end blasphemy laws in countries where they're actually applied and enforced. But the main goal, and the easiest one, is to abolish blasphemy laws in the so-called countries with dead letters laws. I'm referring to countries in Europe, countries that have these letters on their constitutions, but they don't use it. Why is it so important to end blasphemy laws in these countries? Because they basically justify the existence of blasphemy laws in countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, countries in the Middle East, and so on. So I want to quote our president, Andrew Copson, which is also the chief executive of Humanists UK, because this passage is really interesting. Islamic states often justify their blasphemy laws by pointing to the existence of those in Europe, calling Europeans hypocrites for advocating for abolition while still having their own. Indeed, since 2013, the European Union foreign policy has been that blasphemy laws should be abolished, in spite of the fact that several member states have their own. Indeed, countries like Germany or Italy or Spain still have a blasphemy laws. blasphemy laws. For example, in Germany, you can even be sentenced to prison, even though they, of course, they don't do it. So let's pass to the second section of my presentation. Why do we want to end blasphemy laws? We published just yesterday this article on our website, 5 years on, reflection and insights. It's a really interesting, though long article. So if you want to read it, it's on our website. What I want to quote from this article is the following sentence. It's basically our position against blasphemy laws. We defend people's right to discuss, criticize, and ridicule ideas and beliefs, even when this offends other people. Humans have rights, beliefs do not. This is our clear and transparent position, and we want to keep stating it always again and again. So I don't want to go too much into the philosophical discussion, but we can say that there are many, many arguments for the abolition of blasphemy laws. The first one is the fact that we don't praise blasphemy in itself because we don't believe that blasphemy exists at all, but we actually want to abolish blasphemy laws because we believe in freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is indeed a human right. It is recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the Article 19. And so what's wrong with blasphemy laws? The first thing is that they violate this fundamental human right. On the contrary, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights does not mention anywhere the right to be offended. There's no fundamental right not to be offended in one's religious feelings. Religion per se do not hold rights. Ideas do not hold rights. Human beings do instead. The second reason why we want to abolish blasphemy laws is because they basically forbid to criticize religious beliefs and practice. They forbid to criticize institutions, religious leaders, and this kind of criticisms is essential. It's part of democracy, it's part of progress. Without freedom of expression, we cannot progress, we cannot move forward. And it's worth noting here that often religious people themselves are accused of blasphemy. So it's not only atheists, free thinkers, humanists, skeptics that are accused of blasphemy. There are many, many cases of Muslims accused by other Muslims of blasphemy. The case, for example, of the Ahmadi minority in Pakistan. They are considered like an heresy by the traditional Orthodox Muslims. But it's also worth noting that, let's make a clear example. Everyone knows the case of Raif Badawi. Raif Badawi is a liberal from Saudi Arabia, and he was sentenced to 10 years in jail, 10 years of travel ban, and 1,000 lashes. And he was accused of blasphemy, not because he was saying that God doesn't exist or because he was criticizing religion. He was simply trying to implement some liberal reform in the country. And for this reason, he was accused of blasphemy. The third reason is that blasphemy laws are inconsistent and subjective. There is no right way to use them. And also what can sound blasphemous to me might sound not blasphemous to someone else. And since I'm Italian, as you can hear from my accent, I want to refer to a clear example that recently happened in Italy. Last year, a very famous photographer called Oliviero Toscani was fined for 4,000 euros because he said on a radio show that the church, the Catholic Church, seems like a sadomasochistic club. Now, he has been accused of blasphemy and of offending the religious sentiments and feelings of Catholics, and he was fined 4,000 euros. But this is very, very subjective. How can we keep blasphemy laws in democracies in Europe? This is one of the questions I want to answer later on in the discussion. The final argument, one of the final arguments against blasphemy laws is that they legitimize vigilantism, mob violence, and persecution of minorities. Even when the state doesn't intervene to punish blasphemous people, alleged blasphemous people, we see religious group or religious individuals taking the law into their own hands, and they are incentivized to do it because there's actually a blasphemy law in the constitution. Now, we pass to the third section of my presentation, the global data. I want to start by reading the latest report of Article 19, which is a global group campaign for freedom of expression. The quote that I'm going to read is extracted by the Global Expression Report. It says, freedom of expression has fallen to its lowest score since 2009 and now stands at 50 out of 100. This is a score from the report. More than half of the world's population are now living in a freedom of expression crisis. This is a very powerful and impactful expression. That's 3.9 billion people living in countries with a score less than 20 out of 100. This is very preoccupying. We are actually seeing like a backlash, a regression in freedom of expression. And with the pandemic, I can imagine that the situation has been even worse. So if we look at our website, we can see that blasphemy is a criminal offense in at least 84 countries. We say at least because in some countries, the constitutions and the laws are very tricky and ambiguous, so it's hard to identify. But in at least 84 countries, we have blasphemy is a criminal offense. And indeed, if you look at the map, it's very red. We have some green countries, but they are not enough. In particular, you can be sentenced to death for blasphemy in 7 countries worldwide. And please notice that the word blasphemy is always how do you say, you know what I mean? Because we don't believe in blasphemy. We always use this word indirectly. The 7 countries that punish blasphemy with death sentence are Brunei, Nigeria, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Mauritania. They are all countries with a Muslim majority, except Nigeria, which is split in 2. The north part is a Muslim majority area. The south part is a Christian one. And as you can see, Somalia is not listed in this list because what happened is that in Somalia, there are many areas controlled by a terroristic group called Al-Shabaab. And this terroristic group may carry out a death sentence in their own courts for blasphemy because they follow the Sharia law. But these courts are not recognized by the Somalian state. Okay, so we can pass to the last section of my presentation. So I don't know how much time I did speak, but here we are. So since 2015, blasphemy laws have been repealed in 9 countries. Remember, the coalition started in January 2015 after the attack at Charlie Hebdo. Norway was the first one in May 2015 to repeal the blasphemy laws. Truth to be said, in Norway, the parliament already discussed it to repeal blasphemy laws in 2009, but they never ratified this abolition. So when the Charlie Hebdo attack happened, the parliament quickly agreed to ratify this abolition. Iceland followed, Malta in July 2016, France, there's an asterisk because it's not actually the whole country, it's just one region, the Alsace Morel region, which is a region at the borders with Germany. And this region has been part of the German Empire from 1871 to 1918. It was also occupied by by Germany during the Second World War, and for this reason they kept a blasphemy law, which was inherited by the German criminal code. So in October 2016 they realized it and they repealed this law. Denmark in June 2017, it's a very, very interesting case because since 1946, Denmark never, never used these blasphemy laws against any citizen. But in 2017, a 42 years old man burned a Quran on Facebook because he wanted to express his freedom of expression, and he was actually accused of blasphemy. But then the Parliament of Denmark said, do we have a blasphemy law? Let's repeal it. And indeed they repealed it. It's funny because New Zealand heard this news from Denmark, and then they said, oh, we also have a blasphemy law, let's repeal it. But an unusual coalition of the Conservative Party and the Maori Party voted against the repeal of the blasphemy laws. And that's why there's a 2 years gap between Denmark and New Zealand, because New Zealand managed to repeal blasphemy laws just in March 2019. Greece silently repealed the blasphemy laws without telling anything to anyone. We were really surprised when this happened. And Ireland actually had a referendum in 2018 to repeal blasphemy laws. And there's an asterisk because they are still working to legally apply the results of the referendum. And finally, Scotland. It's in gray because the government in April 2020 actually said we are going to repeal blasphemy laws, but they still have to do it. And on this note, I think I can pass the word to Rachel because she's going to focus more on the situation in the UK. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni.
Thanks to you.
Wonderfully done. Over to you, Rachel.
Let me just get my screen share up. If you give me 2 seconds. Okay.
Perfect.
Is everybody, can you just give me a nod if you can see?
Yeah, that's all good, Rachel.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm Rachel Taggart-Ryan. I'm the campaigns officer at Humanists UK, and I lead on our freedom of expression campaigns, including one that we launched quite recently to campaign to repeal the blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland. I want to give you some background of why Humanists UK is interested in working on the issue of blasphemy. We were the leading organisation behind the repeal of blasphemy laws in England and Wales, which we had campaigned for pretty much since our foundation in the 19th century, so well over 100 years. And repeal in England and Wales actually occurred in 2008, so before, quite a long time before the End Blasphemy Laws campaign. And it's kind of leading on from this, the sort of reasons why campaigns get off the ground. In 2008, there were certain political and media factors that kind of led to the campaign gathering momentum. So there were at the time a number of attempts to prosecute under the blasphemy law in the UK, all of which had been rejected by the courts. The last was an attempt by the High Court, which rejected a case taken against the BBC over its screening of the Jerry Springer The Opera, which the BBC which had been playing in the West End as an opera and in the theatre for several years. And the BBC wanted to broadcast it on its major TV networks. complaints were made in an attempt, which was eventually rejected by the High Court, to revive what had been seen as dead letter laws in the UK. This campaign was very much based from Humanists UK on working with supportive members of Parliament who were able to table amendment to the Criminal Justice and Immigration Bill, which was going through Parliament that year. We were able to attack an amendment on which was voted through and supported, and that repealed the relevant sections of legislation. So as you can kind of see, it was a factor of a lot of public interest at the time, a lot of outrage about the particular case surrounding the Jerry Springer the opera that kind of allowed us to move into this space politically and to gain support. Since then, we've been both active at the UN Human Rights Council, calling for the repeal of blasphemy laws globally. We attend 3 times a year, and we've always made reference to blasphemy at every council. And we were one of the founding members, as Giovanni mentioned, of the End Blasphemy Laws Coalition. I want to give an overview of our campaign to repeal the laws in Northern Ireland, which we launched in 2019. 2 events occurred at the time that made us feel that it was right for us to campaign on this issue. The first was the repeal of the blasphemy laws in the Republic of Ireland. This was basically caused by the public fallout from an investigation into potentially blasphemous comments made by the comedian Stephen Fry, which had been broadcast by the Irish network RTE. As a result of this, an Irish citizen reported him to the Garda, which is the Irish police, who launched an investigation whether a prosecution could take place. This caused a great amount of media attention, generally very negative towards the Irish blasphemy law, and as a result of which the Irish government announced that it would hold a public referendum on removing the blasphemy law, which was required because it actually formed part of the Irish constitution. But with that repealed, or set to be repealed, in the Republic of Ireland, this kind of set a precedent for these discussions in the north. At the same time, this is back in 2019, the Scottish National Party, who are still in power in the devolved government in Scotland, made a commitment that they were going to repeal the common law offence in Scotland. So this combined pressure of all kind of comparable parts of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland setting the precedent of repeal really brought the attention on Northern Ireland. And that's why we kind of thought this was the time to launch a very active campaign under the banner of our Northern Ireland section, Northern Ireland Humanists, which is part of Humanists UK. Questions that need to be answered. Before starting a campaign to repeal a blasphemy law, I think you need to have a good idea of the answers to the following questions and use this as the basis for how your campaign plan. So, firstly, you might be surprised, but there was no accurate sources on what blasphemy restrictions still existed in Northern Ireland. So it required us putting in a great deal of research to find out where all the references possibly existed in law. Not even the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, when we went to meet with them, had a clear idea exactly of all the references that would need to be repealed in order to fully carry out this campaign. This was complicated by the fact that some of the law dated from statutes that were created in the UK before the partition of Ireland and the creation of Northern Ireland as a part of the UK, and the common law offence, which is quite a unique part of UK and Irish law, which actually predated the formation of the UK when the Republic of Ireland was a member. So the research stage was really quite important in kind of establishing what the scope of this campaign and kind of establishing us as a credible campaigning organisation. Secondly, and I think this is probably one of the most important points I've certainly learnt from this campaign, is it is not enough for most politicians to be persuaded to act only on principle. You need to show that not only are you making a principled argument about why blasphemy needs to be repealed, but also that there is evidence that change is needed, because it will cause harm either to their constituents directly, or that repeal will be supported by their constituents. So, I mean, we've talked a bit briefly about the principles, and I'll come on to those later, but I think one of the main things you've got to take away from this is you have to get over the argument of why it is important and the harm that blasphemy laws in Europe cause themselves. Thirdly, I think one of the key things is to map out your stakeholders using a power and interest grid. So who do you want to persuade to support your campaign? How much influence do they have, and how interested are they likely to be in your campaign? Finally, you need to decide on an approach for your campaign based on how you think you can best get the attention of those stakeholders, those politicians that you need to persuade to actually enact this repeal. I will come on to this a bit later. It's the case that the majority of stakeholders for us were members of the Northern Ireland Assembly. So we went for a local activist approach as the best way of getting them to respond and essentially to tell us where they stand on repealing the blasphemy law. So as a result of our research, we found that there are references to blasphemy in 4 pieces of legislation in Northern Ireland. And it also existed as a common law offence, which is quite a unique part of UK law. Although it remained unclear whether the common law offence only covers Christianity as it was initially intended, as we haven't had any cases since 1855 where a prosecution has gone ahead in Northern Ireland, it's sort of remained unclear whether offence against a Muslim, for example, or such as burning a Quran, could be prosecuted under these laws, as it was clearly intended at the time to cover only Christianity, but that might have been superseded by the equality legislation since. So it's not a simple task necessarily just to get on top of the legal situation, but this is what we found. Okay, as I said before, you need to demonstrate harm in a very simple way. So we decided to stick to 3 very simple arguments that were easy to make in a 2-page briefing that you could send to any politician that you needed to get on board. So firstly, we had the principled argument that freedom of expression is a fundamental right for individuals. It is protected by all major international human rights structures, including Article 19 of both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which the UK, all parts of the UK, including Northern Ireland, is a party. We then had the harm in principle that shielding religion from criticism cannot be regarded as a social good. Criticism which is false can be tested and met with legitimate counter-arguments, whilst criticism which is true should be heard for the sake of correcting errors. In some cases, criticism helps religious thinkers improve theology. In more substantive cases, criticism is essential to shedding light on immoral and unlawful practices carried out in the name of religion. But I think one of the arguments that's really helped us build support with Northern Ireland legislators is the harm in practice, which I will come on to. I think these 3 arguments can be made across all of Europe's blasphemy laws, and I certainly hope if members of Young Humanists International are kind of thinking how they might set up their own campaigns, I think you can take these various same arguments and apply them even in countries such as Italy and Spain, where active prosecutions are still going ahead. So come on to the evidence of harm. I think that it is crucial and a difficult part when it comes to European blasphemy laws is demonstrating that they are not dead letters and there are real consequences to retaining them. From my research, I found that there are that these 3 were the most compelling pieces of evidence that we came up with, and I think they could be used across all sort of humanist groups in Europe. The first being that a dead letter law can be revived at any time. In England and Wales, there were periodic attempts to bring blasphemy prosecutions, even though they did not succeed. We saw in Denmark in 2017 the example that Giovanni mentioned, and also in the Republic of Ireland, it was seen as a dead letter law until an investigation was actually taken out against Stephen Fry. We can see at the international level that the Republic of Ireland's blasphemy law, which is now set to be repealed in 2010, was used as the basis for a motion by Pakistan in the United Nations Human Rights Council to bring about international restrictions on blasphemy. So we can see the direct influence between a dead letter law in Europe and a country which is actively prosecuting and persecuting on the basis of blasphemy. And this quote, I think everybody should use. It's from the former UN Special Rapporteur on Religion and Belief, that actually just says this is the case in his findings on blasphemy. So moving on to who do you need to persuade? I think fundamental to thinking about any campaign to repeal is who has the power to repeal these laws. For us, this was a very simple question. The answer is that this was a devolved matter, so it was the Northern Ireland Assembly. So the key question is we needed to find out which parties and which individual members, which legislators would support a campaign. So we sent them all a briefing and asked them, would you support a campaign? Do you think we should repeal the blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland? And out of roughly 90 MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly, I had one reply, which was from an independent who was a young earth creationist, and simply he said, in a word, no, I do not support your campaign. So we thought we needed another approach. So we set up a Write to Your MLA function on our website, and we asked our constituents in Northern Ireland, our members and supporters, to write to their own representatives directly. And we quickly found out through getting replies that way that most parties supported repeal. It was only the Democratic Unionist Party who were out and out opposed. You might not all be familiar with Northern Ireland party politics, but the Democratic Unionists, or the DUP, are a very conservative Protestant party that represents the community that wishes to remain part of the UK. On the other hand, their opposite party, Sinn Féin, which is a Republican, mostly Catholic party, which campaigns to join the Republic of Ireland, had moved to support repeal and have been a big asset to us in this campaign. And their reason for moving to repeal was that the laws in the Republic of Ireland, as we said, had been repealed as a result of the public referendum. And so they could not principally support retaining laws in the north of Ireland, which no longer existed in the Republic. Okay, so I've given an overview of some of the reasons that the DUP gave in opposition to repeal. As you can see, and this is important, a lot of them are connected to the very Protestant sense of identity as a Christian nation that existed within the Democratic Unionist Party, and fears that that identity was being undermined rather than actual facts on the ground about what the blasphemy laws, you know, what kind of role they actually played in Northern Ireland. So I think this should be borne in mind when thinking about how to approach these kind of oppositions. It's not necessarily coming from a place of well-informed criticism of the expression of religious belief or principle points of view. Much of the opposition we encountered in Northern Ireland has to do with religious senses of identity. As you can see from this top one, we were told that the repeal will lead to the persecution of Christians in Northern Ireland, which is simply untrue because blasphemy laws are unconnected to hate crime laws, which already provide protection for all religious beliefs groups. And we're also told that it just felt like religion was being undermined, and people felt the blasphemy law, even though it hadn't been used, was necessary to protect respect for religion, which I think is obviously quite a false argument, and that respect is not something you can mandate by law. So we kind of went through, and I suppose one of the other arguments that came up quite a lot is a case in Northern Ireland related to Ash's Bakery, which refused to bake a same-sex marriage campaign cake, a cake which carried a support gay marriage message on it 4 or 5 years ago. And they were thinking that even though these two bits of law are completely unconnected, that sense of identity was like, if we lose this blasphemy law, will those kind of sentiments, kind of underpinning conservative religious beliefs in Northern Ireland be kind of eroded. So I think, as you can see, we can kind of got evidence that kind of against nearly every point that was raised in opposition. But it is quite important to think about how you're going to approach this in terms of not inflaming that sense of persecution, even in a country which hasn't prosecuted since 1855, doesn't think the law is necessarily necessary, but at the same time doesn't want to get rid of it. So you need to kind of think about how those factors bear it out. I think also bearing in mind, we were quite surprised having got a strong oppositional response from the Democratic Unionist Party, that it was still worth us talking to individual members of that party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. And you kind of feel that even though a party line has been given and they will be whipped to vote against a repeal bill, many of them will actually support it individually, but because they're part of the party structure, they're not free to express or campaign on those views individually. But it is worth always continuing to campaign on an individual level and trying to persuade individual legislators, even if you come up against sort of institutional blocks within party structures. So how do we campaign? We learned very early on that the Northern Ireland Assembly members had really no interest in talking to professional campaigners based in London who seemed very remote from Northern Ireland. We didn't get initially very many replies to briefings that we sent out and to approaching them directly. So what we decided to do was adopt a very local activist model of a campaign, where all actions we took involved getting our members and supporters in Northern Ireland to take those actions themselves. The most effective of these was to ask them to write to their representatives, as MLAs are obliged to reply to constituent emails in the way that they're not obliged to reply to someone like me who's a paid campaigner. And we gained a lot of information about where the party stood in this way. And from this, we were able to gather that actually there was a lot more support and a lot more thinking about blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland than we had first thought. And so building on this kind of local activist approach, we also started a petition, and we have a sort of very family-friendly protest in Belfast on International Blasphemy Day, which you've got a nice picture of there, to highlight the issue and to get some media coverage and keep as a kind of contemporary issue, which was people in Northern Ireland were talking about. And we've also approached many other religion and belief groups to try and get joint statements and a coalition together to sort of say we broadly support a repeal, and to kind of work collectively and say that this is not just the voice of humanists and atheists and free thinkers, but this is something that, you know, all religion and belief groups across Northern Ireland see the need to repeal. I think other things that we kind of are arranging to do is then we kind of gain information about which politicians supported us. So we arranged meetings and we drafted a bill which we to give to those politicians, say, look, we've even done all of the work. Here is a bill, you just need to go and it. So that's kind of where we're at now. So we're now nearly 2 years into this campaign, and we believe that we now have built up sufficient support from MLAs that if we were to get a bill within the Northern Ireland Assembly, either in this session or the next, we are quite confident would have enough support to get it to pass. So the reason for this is actually quite complicated, but there's a window of opportunity politically, and this is where being a lobbyist kind of comes in, that the Democratic Unionist Party, who, even though their own individual members might support us, are going to be mandated to vote against this, has committed in the next 2 sessions of Parliament not to oppose or use mechanisms within the Northern Ireland Assembly to block certain pieces of legislation, and this would be one of them. So we have a window of opportunity. Not only do we have sufficient support, but there is a kind of agreement that the main opposition wouldn't block such types of legislation, at least either in this session or the next session. So we're currently trying to find a supportive MLA, member of the Legislative Assembly, who would take this bill forward. And I think that's kind of a bit of a success from this being a campaign which didn't exist 2 years ago. now to getting to the point where we are ready to kind of actually put legislation through our parliaments. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully if you have some questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And then just to add to the end of Rachel's talk is that as part of my role within Young Humanists International as European Young Humanist Chair, the aim going forwards, especially for the next few months, is to then work with Humanists UK on that on this kind of campaign in relation to the blasphemy laws within Northern Ireland. So one of the questions straight up then really to you, Rachel, straight away is, how do you think members across Europe can actually help to support or kind of stand up to this, really?
Well, I think there's two sort of interesting ways. It has been a very local activist approach in Northern Ireland, that we need people in Northern Ireland to be writing and pushing their talking to their own representatives. But I think it would be quite possible for people across Europe to set up very similar campaigns in their own countries which still have blasphemy restrictions. And I'm hoping we kind of maybe have put a bit of a model together on how you might be able to use the example in Northern Ireland to model to your own country where you might still have these laws. And secondly, I think if it actually comes closer and we do get a bill on the floor in the Northern Ireland Assembly, I think a lot of that will be about persuading Northern Ireland constituents that this is an important issue, and doing that will be generating a lot of blogs, a lot of articles, really making the case and putting international pressure. And certainly I think that's something which Young Humanists could be involved in.
Giovanni, in relation to the current kind of political climate in Scotland, what are your thoughts on their current position in relation to blasphemy laws and the current new bill that they're bringing in as well?
Well, it's a very delicate question, because basically the parliament is repealing the blasphemy laws, but there's a huge risk of reintroducing it in a different way. You don't call it blasphemy, but you are using the category of hate speech to punish freedom of expression. We know that Humanist Society Scotland, which is one of our members, is campaigning and lobbying at the Scottish Parliament to avoid this. And we are confident that the Scottish Parliament is going to reach a good law. This is, I don't know if it's wishful thinking or not. And anyway, it's worth noticing that in 2018, Humanists International and Humanist Society Scotland organized a meeting at the Scottish Parliament calling for the end of blasphemy laws. Also, Gulala Ismail from Pakistan was there. And it's by showing what is happening all around the world because of blasphemy laws that we managed to convince the Scottish MPs to repeal blasphemy laws. So if I can add something to your question too, I think that looking the issue from a global perspective, we need to tell to our European members, you are keeping a law on your constitution that elsewhere is killing people, a law that it's putting people in prison. So we need to bring to Europe the cases from Pakistan, from Saudi Arabia, and we need to tell them these are real people dying for the same blasphemy law that you have in your constitution.
If you're interested, I mean, I wrote part of Humanist Society Scotland's response to call for evidence on the Scottish hate crime bill. So on the one hand, this bill is great because it explicitly repeals the common law offence of blasphemy that still remains in Scotland. The problem is the actual hate crime part of it, and there's several issues with the rest of the bill, but the main one is that they are removing the necessity for intent to be demonstrated in order to prosecute someone who words could be interpreted as hate speech. So currently, and this is the same in England and Wales, if you are accused of hate speech, it is upon the prosecution to demonstrate that you intended to do so. And that was part of the aim of which can lead to a higher sentence in jail if you were convicted of that particular crime. Now, what it is proposing is to replace that with a provision that it is merely likely or highly likely that you intended to stir up religious hatred. I mean, that provision already exists for racial hatred, but there's whether you could add that for religious hate speech as well. Now, the problem with that is a lot of criticism, very legitimate freedom of expression that comes as criticism or ridicule of religious beliefs, such as satire, or sending up, would fall under that. You can say, well, someone was highly likely to have been offended, therefore it's stirring up hatred, even if that person didn't intend to. So that would have a big effect on the arts, on satire, on many forms of legitimate expression. So behind the scenes with Humanist Society Scotland, we organised a joint letter of many high Scottish government pointing this out. One of them was Rowan Atkinson, the comedian and actor, and hopefully most of you will be familiar with him. Because of his particular signature, we got a huge kind of response on social media. It was trending on the day of the launch. And as a result of that, we've kind of been informed via various sort of messages and tweets by the particular Scottish minister in charge of this bill that that particular vision is likely to change in the way that we've argued it should. So we are confident that by the time the actual Scottish hate crime bill hits the floor of the Scottish Parliament, it will be in a lot better shape than it is now and won't essentially reintroduce a blasphemy law that it also repeals.
And then following on from that, do you think that, do you predict that there'd be a significant kind of fundamentalist pushback in Northern Ireland should those blasphemy laws be repealed? And have we seen that before in other countries when we tried to do this?
It's an interesting question. It's really hard to sort of predict how people who we're not particularly in contact with will feel about this. We are quite aware that many of the democratic Protestant parties and have sort of argued in favour of supporting this, but there hasn't been a huge backlash in the Republic of Ireland. The referendum was supported by over 60% in favour of repeal. So,
you know what swayed that, Rachel? Do you know what swayed them to agree with that, do you think? Because it was probably expected that that wouldn't happen.
I think if you live outside of Ireland, you're probably not kind of aware of the intricacies of the changing relationship between church and state in Ireland, which has been going on for the last 2 decades. And there is actually quite a strong movement now within Ireland to kind of dig out the kind of very rotten roots of a theocracy which has existed in the Republic of Ireland for a very long time, and that has been perpetuated by many scandals, many public embarrassments caused by the Catholic Church, which for many has had a very long stranglehold over Irish politics since the foundation of the Irish Free State in the 1920s. So there is actually a very strong anti-church and anti-papacy sentiment in Ireland, even though outwardly it appears to still be a very strongly Catholic state.
And you know what, leading on from that, Giovanni, what do you think the role of the Catholic Church has been currently in relation to blasphemy laws in different nations? Like, are they still taking an active role in repealing against it?
The Catholic Church in itself, no, but religious group attached to it, yes. Because, for example, the most recent cases, for example, in Spain, were started by a group of Catholic lawyers. The Catholic Church is always like pretending to be as liberal as possible in Europe, but behind the scene, those fundamentalist groups are actually suing people for blasphemy. I can make two examples from Spain, actually three. In 2017, if I'm not wrong, let me check. It was 2017, yes, three feminist activists in Spain during a protest, they marched with a vagina-shaped Holy Mary, and they've been accused of blasphemy and sentenced to blasphemy. And so you can see how the right to protest and the right to freedom of expression is basically undermined by blasphemy laws. What happened is that a very famous comedian commented on this sentence, saying something that I cannot translate in English because it's very Spanish. Is basically saying, I don't give a fuck about God and so on. He was accused himself of blasphemy. He refused to go to court because he said, it's 2020, we cannot think about blasphemy as a real crime. But yet he was convicted in the end of blasphemy. Another a guy published on Instagram a Photoshop of his face on a crucifix, and he was sentenced to pay a fine of 480 euros. Of course, the Catholic Church is not involved in this. It's always, as I said, a group of Catholic lawyers. But the Catholic Church is, how do you say, justifying this by staying silent. Because Austria needed to protect the religious peace in his country. We don't know what does it mean, religious peace. It's really an ambiguous expression, but that's the opposite direction of France, for example. You are punishing a citizen of your own country just for sharing factual information, because it's in the Hadith or in the Quran, I don't remember, that it says that Muhammad, the prophet, has married a girl of 9 years old. So you are punishing someone for simply saying the truth, you know. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would add on to that, in the position of France, I think is been strong, and I think more European countries should be supporting that stance and having the courage and to do that. I obviously know a lot of hardly any European newspapers have covered the story greatly, nor have they replicated the cartoons of Charlie Hebdo that caused the offence. I think I know that they obviously, all these publications have duty of care towards their employees, and that's a big decision to be able to take. But I would say I think many campaigning organisations have been, such as Humanists UK, have been disappointed that there hasn't been more solidarity on this issue across Europe. Just adding on to what Giovanni said about the case in Austria, because it really does underline the point about why campaigning is going to be the way forward. The case in Austria demonstrated that the European Court of Human Rights could not be relied upon to strike down Europe's blasphemy laws. It said that there is a margin of appreciation, which is a legal thing that only really exists within European law, but essentially allows European countries a margin of which they can continue to have blasphemy laws on their books, on their statute books. So what that tells us essentially is the legal route is not the route to go down in terms of taking cases and trying to say that these laws violate constitutional rights, because the court is not going to rule in your favour. So what you need to do is to focus on making the case for repeal in individual nations to their own legislation, to their legislators rather than to their courts. And I think that's basically where we would be encouraging many members of Young Humanists, for example, in their own countries to say, this isn't going to be resolved by the courts, it's going to be resolved by campaigning at parliaments.
Brilliant. I agree. And with that note, we reach the end of the event today. I want to wholeheartedly thank both panelists for their time and effort and coming on today. So I really do thank you guys. Thank you once again to Young Humanists UK for all of the effort that they put in over the whole of the month of October, and within Young Humanists International as well for supporting it too.